My name is Bill Fry, and we're going to have the defense of Joan Asencio, Yace, this afternoon. And I guess you're going to do your defense in English, so I'm going to do this in English too. And we'll have 30 minutes for the presentation. I'd like to have 10, 15 minutes question and answer from the audience. Then we'll ask you to leave, and the committee will ask questions of the candidate for however long it takes us. And then we'll deliberate as a committee, and we'll call Joanne back in, and we'll come up with the final decision. And this procedure should take us somewhere around an hour. So I want to thank everybody for coming, and I think you're in for a very interesting defense. And with that in mind, Joanne, the floor is yours. Oh, and one thing I want to do is all of us, if we can turn off our cameras and our microphones and sort of max out the bandwidth here.
Great. Right, so
we can have
thank you. Good. Right, thank you, Fry. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I am happy to finally present my thesis defense titled Sustainable Community Aqueducts as Models for Sustainable Community Microgrids, and then the case study of Corcovado-Arriba's governance and management practices. It will be divided in 8 sections as soon as it comes down. Right, there we go. We'll begin with an introduction, followed by the framework, methodology, the results, discussion, conclusion, limitations, and future work recommendations. And by the end, we'll have the questions and answers section. So, as we are all aware, Puerto Rico experienced the landfall of Hurricane Maria in 2017, causing the longest power outage in the U.S. history and the second one in the world. This research began in 2016, a time when microgrids were considered as ideal for the inclusion of renewable energy and for communities to form part of the energy sector. Now, after the hurricane, they became the solution for this, and specifically for those that are isolated and for their resilience. Microgrids are a group of interconnected loads with distributed energy resources within an electrical boundary that operate as a single controllable unit and that can operate in an island mode or interconnected to the grid. Now, we did notice that the conversations about the inclusion of microgrids tended towards the inclusion of robust technologies, but the social component was not being equally addressed. So in this presentation, I will demonstrate that community microgrids are social technical systems and that for their sustainability, the social components require a lot of attention. Social technical systems are interactive ensembles of engineered artifacts embedded in society, linked with economies, and connected with ecologies. This means that they're highly constrained by internal and external environments, which are these interactions. You have the users, the managers, operators, financial resources, you got externally the policies and regulations, the economy, and you will do have ecology within and externally, and the owners can be also local or external. Examples include the electric grids, the water supply networks, telecommunication systems, transports, and healthcare systems. The sustainability of this infrastructure or the social technical systems relies on the balance between these 3 dimensions we've mentioned already. Now, at the community level, the literature suggests that the technology requires to be addressed based also with governance and management tied with the technologies. And by governance, we refer to the capital and social, the capitals of political and social, and management, financial and human, and natural, physical, or technologies. This research addresses for the first 2 dimensions. Governance refers to the institutions, mechanisms, and processes backed by political power and authority that allow a set of activities to be set forth. These are the regulations that we amend and preserve for the production, distribution, and use of our resources. Now, management is what sets forth the set of activities that implement the strategies that are set by the government. Now, microgrids have a very specific type of resource that is known as a common pool. In a simple way of understanding it, these have limited amounts of units, and it's hard to exclude users from its access. In other words, if I consume one amount of energy, I will be consuming something that a person could have used. So if I overconsume within that microgrid, I will be putting the access of the resource for the whole community at risk. Now, Ostrom identified a set of 8 design principles that are found in long enduring governing institutions. These are clearly defined boundaries, proportional equivalence between benefits and costs, collective choice arrangements, monitoring, graduated sanctions, conflict mechanisms, minimal recognitions of rights to organize, and nested enterprises for larger systems. So we thought, how would this framework apply in the context of Puerto Rico, and what social factors may influence the sustainability of microgrids in this context? To this end, we found aqueducts because they are social technical systems. They have a distribution system of a common pool resource, and they share similar infrastructure for localized generation, storage, distribution, and they have multiple loads, that is the users, within a very specific boundary. The methodology to conduct this research was building theories from case studies developed by Eisenhardt in 1989. To this end, we selected Corcovado Arriba as a successful community aqueduct among around 243 aqueducts in Puerto Rico. They are isolated community aqueducts that have over 50 years of successful development history and community work, and have been previously recognized by the press and other NGOs such as the American Water Works Association. Now, to move forward, we developed 3 guiding questions, which are: how is this community aqueduct governed and managed? What attitudes, attributes, and decision-making procedures are present in leaders as critical to promote the sustainability of the aqueduct? And what factors are necessary for the effective implementation of this type of community project? So we use these 3 guiding questions to discuss in terms of conceptual transferability from aqueducts onto microgrids. We use 3 sources of data. It is important to highlight that the subject of research was the committee and not the whole community. This is why you see that the sources of in-depth interviews were for specific community members. We had 3 sources of data: in-depth interviews, observations, and documents. A total of 27 in-depth interviews, observations, and document reviews were related specific to governance activities and management. You have community assemblies, monthly meetings, aqueduct operations and maintenance, tariff collection days, and so forth. And for documents, you got minutes, tariff collection documents and tools, the bylaw, newspaper articles, etc. And these were mostly collected via audio recording and photographs, and were processed mostly with analytical memos. So, how is this community governed and managed? They hold a democratic governance, and this was seen with their community assemblies, which are held with parliamentary procedures. This means that they address one issue at a time, and for every issue, everyone has to say and a vote to talk about the issue, and they can add more issues into their whole conversation, and everyone has a vote. The leading committee is elected by the community, and their bylaw is amended during assemblies. The bylaw contains the regulations to access, use, and the responsibilities for the operations and maintenance of the aqueduct. This is the boundaries. What's the reach of the service? From where to where can I provide the service? What's the tariff structure and other fees such as incoming or new entries and illegal behavior? And it also states that the whole community is responsible for the aqueduct maintenance. And this is why you will see on the left that the image has the community as the main actor in the governance structure. The leading committee is also responsible for internal accountability and for the external environment. Internally, they have their monthly meetings and the assemblies in which they have to report what are the financial status, what projects are they doing, and what's going on in the community, and they keep records. So this records keeping aids for the external environment. Externally, they are accountable as a legal entity. This case is the tax-exempt nonprofit corporation. And with this legal entity, they have access to external resources, and they are held accountable to the governmental agencies. For the corporation, they need to be in good standing, and for the infrastructure, and they have an external accountant that provides aid to maintain a financial health in their practices. It is important to highlight that from their governance, their legal entity as a nonprofit corporation, they have access to multiple sources of revenue and income that other entities do not have. They have access to philanthropy, and they generate internally their own revenue. Now, all of the income and capital generated internally is reinvested in the operations and in the community. There's no capital accumulation for no one. So they have a social enterprise business model, and you do have an ongoing revenue from tariff collection that serves for everyday costs. Philanthropic support and governmental support is important to highlight that it's for occasional infrastructural projects. It's not for ongoing support. It's for example, Fundación Comunitaria provided aid with the battery backup, and the government for pipelines and for initial construction. So how is it managed? They have an organic type of management, which is flexible, adaptive, and task-oriented people. The image on the left attempts to portray these interactions among the community members. And here I want to highlight that it is explicit that the communities are involved with the aqueduct manager and maintaining the infrastructure. Here are the infrastructure levels of responsibility. The green areas are common areas, and here are the ones that are held responsible by the users. The O&M is the aqueduct manager is in charge of monitoring the infrastructure, the water quality, repairs and replaces, and the users, they need to monitor their own consumption, repairs and replace. The meter here is critical because it helps the users know how are they consuming, what are they consuming, and it also provides the measure to conduct their tariff collection. Their tariff collection has a 3-week process, begins with the meter readings, the treasurer develops the bill, then you have the tariff collection day and the monthly meeting. If there is a 1-month defaulter, they send a letter, as a first notice. But if there's a 2nd-month defaulter, the second letter has a scheduled meeting with the community member because they want to know what's going on. And the letter says, we want to know what's going on, we want to help you. But if you are not responsive by the third month, we will just cut out your service. So this practice has a defaulting rate of 5.4 to 3%. It is very low. Second question, what attributes, and decision-making procedures are present in the leaders as critical to promote the sustainability of the aqueduct? For this, we use the book Governance for Sustainability, Issues, Challenges, and Successes. It has multiple attributes found, but we highlighted 5. The community, it has the respect for the rule of law, consistency and coherency in policy formation, transparency and accountability, citizens' rights and duties, and ecological citizenship. These 4 were seen mostly with community assemblies, the 3 with monthly meetings, and they also have constant communications, and not just face-to-face. They have banners everywhere whenever there is an assembly. They use speakers. They go house to house, sending different notifications whenever there is a change in the assembly. So they keep contact communication. And just the implementation of the bylaw includes everything. And it also promotes the sustainability of the community because it promotes the water conservation and the stability of the social and economic status in the community. Another thing that I found working, is that they promote, or they have the social justice and economic stability over economic growth. Economic growth here means a market-oriented paradigm and opportunistic behavior, and these are not seen in the community. They actually have an overall human well-being focus in what they are doing. Here are 3 examples that portray this attitude and this attribute. First example, they pardoned a 3-month penalty fee to a non-defaulter community member due to family issues. This community member was responsible. It was recognized as such, and they saw that they didn't want to have this penalty fee, which is the 25% of the whole bill. However, the community member still had to pay for the 3 months. He was still responsible for his part. The second example is that they helped with a 1,000 water tariff debt to an impoverished family in the community. Here they paid for 50% of the debt, but the member had to seek for the other 50%. I mean, the member still had the responsibility to look for the other 50%, even when it was still the it would have, even if it was another aid from the municipality. I'm sorry. The third example is that they considered increasing the payment of a community member who under-invoiced for his services. This is clearly not an opportunistic behavior. And they are still being responsible because they're paying, but they're actually doing it in a justly way. Third question, what factors are necessary for the effective implementation of this type of community project? For this question, the research was conducted for the history, how the project for them came about, what were the factors back then in 1967, and what were the gaps for what they are today, because they're currently considered as sustainable. So those 2 things. Back in 1967, they had a field worker, engineers supervising the construction. They leveraged governmental resources, and they adapted the project to local context. This means that community members could not read, so the educational material was with a lot of pictures and images. They did not have a road, so they helped construct the road, and of course the aqueduct, because it was not available. This work also promoted the democratic governance model, engaged community members in the process, and also enabled local capacities and resources. And this work also promoted the development of social capital and adaptive capabilities. And this one is critical it was critical for them to be today what they are. Today, steps for the project include that these utilities require a legal accountability to have ownership, management, and to operate the utility. And they also require financial capabilities to have access to external resources. To this end, the community with its adaptive capabilities was capable of reaching out to NGOs, universities, and the very government and individuals to help out with resources, technical assistance, capacity building, funds and donations, among other resources. And they also have currently certified public accountant to help maintain the financial status. Okay, how does this 3 questions translate or transfer from the aqueduct onto the microgrid, which is the ultimate purpose of this research? First, the democratic governance model is critical for microgrids today because they bring together multiple interests into agreements, and it's a structure that is based on this principle, bringing multiple interests together. And also this practice maintains an internal trust that is expected for social capital. The nonprofit corporation, if it's an entity or a community that doesn't have enough resources locally, if it's remote in the mountains, it might require a form of entity that enables access to multiple sources of income. Challenges for this type of, for microgrids today. As you can see, the architecture of this image versus this one, here is centralized. Please don't confuse with like the long transmission lines. This one is centralized because it has just one source of generation and storage. And here, there is no doubt that the users require an agreement to make sure that all of them have access to this. But here in the new microgrids, you have distributed energy resources. And without an institution, how do you make sure that everyone agrees to share the costs for the common areas such as the lighting? How do you make sure that those that maybe don't have access to distributed energy resources have access to energy? And how do you make sure that sensible critical users such as elderly or people that require ongoing access to power have access to power all the time? This could be promoted with a democratic institutional agreement plus management technology. This is a justice measure. Management, transferability. First factor, administrative management is highly transferable. Tariff collection is highly transferable. Construction, repairs, installations, and replacements, both systems require designers, engineers, certified installers, and heavy machinery for the construction. Operations and maintenance for both systems require certified operators. Now, this certification is different for both aqueducts and microgrids, specifically for the risk of operational mismanagement. For aqueducts, you put at risk the whole community's health if you're not managing well the water. Now, for microgrids, you have an issue of the economy because you might be damaging devices in their households with brown energy and the operator's health. I mean, he could get killed with mismanaging the whole infrastructure. So here it's critical to have well-educated and instructed operators. Technologies, aqueducts are more mechanical and microgrids have a more digital type of technology that might require other resources such as the internet. They bring other issues such as cybersecurity, and the cost of technologies, smart technologies, is higher. So for project implementation, how do we transfer this? The most important thing for the project is that it is developed in a way that includes a vision for the future, that you prepare the project in a way that the community will be able to work on its own when the project implementer is not around. And for this purpose, we developed an idea of 3 phases. The first one is to identify the capital for the project, identify capacity building programs, have a field worker, work with engineers and designers, and have a committed ongoing technical assistance from an external environment. The second phase would have a collaborative agreement with the locals so they can involve in the process. They have the project should be using local capabilities and resources provide capacity building, develop a convergent plan with the locals. In this case, if you have the locals developing the whole architecture of the microgrid, you might want to consider the value of the location of the renewable energy. So maybe you have a household and they're saying, well, I want it in my roof. And they're saying, please do not put it on the soil because this is for agriculture. So people know where they want the things. And there's a possibility of adding people in the process of planning for the architecture of microgrids. And in this case, you might also have the institutional emergence. And finally, the implementation process would also be collaborative. People might be involved if they got certified in the process, or at least work with the implementers and the whole project. So conclusion, I'm wrapping quickly. The long-term community-based technical sustainability is highly related to local capabilities, the adaptive capabilities, that they're highly engaged and educated by locals, and that there is an enabling supportive policy environment. As I don't know if you got it right, but back in 1967, the government was the one leading the whole process and was enabling providing resources. So if you have supportive policy environment, you might get something like that, because back then those were the policies. Another thing is that local management of the resources might also promote social and environmental justice. As you saw in the whole presentation, the democratic and the attitudes found in the leaders, they care for their locals and they want to make sure that people have access to the resource, but they still have people responsible for their access. But there's an internal monitoring about that. So it's not that you have to pay, but you can, there's a balance because people know each other. Limitations from this work. There is a bias because I had to use the community's name. So there's an IRB issue requirement that you need to make sure that you're not putting the reputation of the communities at risk. And this work does not provide a detailed analysis of current energy-related policies. And I must say that 3 to 2 days ago, they were proposing within the Civil Rights Code to add that everyone needs to have like access to energy and water. And this was like 3 days ago. Future work recommendations. Sustainability factor comparison with other community aqueducts and recently developed microgrids. I am aware that currently we have community microgrids developed, so it would be good to analyze these factors for these other communities and see whether they are gaps and can be tested. And a comparison between the rural, urban, and suburban communities in terms of available resources and different ownership models, such as local, community, third party, or government. And I would love to wrap up my presentation with this quote from Ostrom in 1994. A major lesson that we need to take forward into the next century is that it is a mistake to design irrigation and other development projects on the presumption that physical capital is the most important input factor in development. Thank you so much. Here are the references. Right. You're up.
Very good. Thanks.
Okay.
Let's open this up for some questions from people who are participating here in the defense. And I guess I'll just kind of let you throw yourself in here.
Bill, could I ask a question, please?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I'm just curious, Joanne, I mean, there's so many things to talk about here, but my question is, Do you know of any examples either in Puerto Rico or elsewhere that are trying to do something like this in the context of microgrids, and what do you know about how they are proceeding, and does it relate to any of the factors or other things that you have said?
Well, yes, I know. Fundación Comunitaria is currently, that they work with the capital, community capital model, and they locally were the ones that promoted the development of Toro Negro, and they know about the challenges that we have currently in the policy and all of that. But I mean, yeah, I'm pretty sure about that one. I don't know if that answers your question. I know that at least the ones that I did see are mostly from developing countries. They have a lot of material, but there you don't have a lot of regulatory challenges as we have here. And in the U.S., there are some community microgrids in development, but I haven't seen that they're addressing these types of factors. At least what I've seen so far are utility-led microgrids, community microgrids that are not necessarily community-based. And then there's a difference because a utility has just one owner versus multiple owners, and that's a challenge. So there's not a democracy there. That's what I'm saying. That. Anyone else? I don't know if I answered your question, Chris.
Yes, you did, and I mean, we could pursue this more, but I think there's other questions, and I have to go to another defense anyway in a few minutes. Congratulations so far, and
right.
May I make a comment?
Go ahead, Agustín. Nice to see you.
Hola, Joan. Gracias por la presentación. Have you heard from the people? The Environmental Defense Fund, I think that Agustín Carbó is on this message, this presentation as well. I have a number of persons working on a project, DVDs in Culebra. They're trying to have community microgrids or community solar over there.
Yeah.
We spoke with Pamela McDougall and Amelia, I don't remember her last name, Amelia Salagaras.
Yeah. Amelia, yeah.
You know them.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
I think that they will benefit from the recording of this presentation and the work you have done. There is another project that is led by Marcel Castro, who's also in this conversation today. And, it's about microgrids. That one is more, that's funded by the Department of Commerce, and then there is a group from Paston and the Solar Foundation there, and I believe they also will benefit from understanding these concepts you're presenting, particularly the way you could fund these communities, solar microgrids, because they seem to be obsessed with the third-party funding that comes from the market-based idea that everything that market does is better. So it will be very good to I believe for them to receive the information you have. One thing that I want to point out is the low value that you found on default customers, if you will, or participants, default participants. I will imagine that Acueductos and Energía Eléctrica will be very, very glad if they could achieve such a low value. Perhaps they need to learn about this as well. So I will encourage you to share the findings of your work broadly. They do show that there are alternative ways of achieving our objectives. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Agustín.
Any other questions?
Any questions?
Yes, I have a question, Joan. Congratulations for your presentation.
Thank you.
Joan, among many other factors, we have clearly seen the relevance of business administration knowledge for the success of the organization and the study. How has your knowledge acquired in the MBA been useful in your research to understand all the organizational issues, for example, structure, leadership, supervision, accountability, and ethical decision making? Can you bring some examples, simple examples, please?
Examples of how I've seen my knowledge from business administration in this community. Well, first, it's critical having a good financial practice, having a good accountability with the external environment, and these are critical to attract resources, because external entities that see that you have internal good practices, that is a trustworthy organization which you can work with. So what I've seen, and that is true with any business in common, if you have good internal practices, it is likely that you will attract resources that promote the further development of whatever it is that you're working. So good financial practices, accountability with the legal and external environments, and maintaining your mission in tune and aligned with what you're doing. So that I would just simply say that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. May I?
Yeah,
Go
yes.
ahead.
This is one of the most rewarding thesis defenses I've participated on, and at the same time, one of the most difficult ones to objectively assess and just listen to. And as part of this committee, if my committee members would allow me, I'm gonna take a moment to try to place Joan's work in a broader context that I hope will not go too far astray from our disciplinary responsibilities here. Joan is part of a group of superhero students, superhero Puerto Rican students, that because of their dedication and their steadfast interest in sustainability and energy issues in Puerto Rico before Maria, they have been able to direct and really channel all that work in extremely efficient and outstanding quality of work at the graduate level, not only at the University of Puerto Rico, but at a number of other universities. And I don't need to mention the names. All you have to do is look around that little list in the corner of and you will see the names of students that, like Joan, are superheroes, looking at food, looking at energy, looking at water, and looking at the nexus of all of those issues with regards to the sustainability of the island that gave them birth. These students, we call them RISE students, for a reason I would let them tell you why. But the truth of the matter is that I think the most important issue here that is being demonstrated in this thesis is the kind of contribution that universities make towards what we call community resilience, or what we call resilience, or everybody's talking about.
Well, that was going to be my question.
Well, I won't go there.
Okay.
I won't go there. As you can see, you know, Marla's right next to me. So anyway. Resilience is the governance of uncertainty. And the community that Joan has been working with, and the communities that all of these students have been working with, are at the forefront of learning how to govern their uncertainty in the face of an inept, at best and at worst, nowhere to be found governmental structure in Puerto Rico. So that being said, and giving honor to this group of students who now Joan is representing in her thesis, what my comment to Joan goes around the implications of her model, of common pool resource for microgrids, to the planning or the future of energy and water planning in Puerto Rico. What do you think the implications, or what would you like the implications of your model to be, if any, to the future of energy and water planning in Puerto Rico? What would you like to see? And I remind you that you have nonprofit organizations that are now with us, looking and can gain from the insight that you're bringing on with this. I'll leave it at that.
The one thing that is highlighted throughout this work is that people, those that are going to be using the infrastructure, are involved in the process since the beginning. That's the one thing. And design the project in a way that it develops an institution in which they have a voice constantly. And again, the whole democratic structure of governance aids in this, because you already have a model for having the democracy. So that's not new. It's just to put it in practice and implement it and develop the project in that way. And what's unfortunate, Cecilio, is that it's easier to run an installation project than to run a social project. And that's true. And that's another thing that is a challenge, because when you're funded, you are limited in timelines. And if you're not capable of explaining why you need more time to develop the social institutions, you might not pitch the whole necessity of having that as something important in the process. So if this work somehow can tell people that sustainability is greatly related to the social components, perhaps you can tell the funders that are financing or supporting this project, hey, give us more time. We need to develop this because this is critical for the long term. And I would just give one example from a large installation in Hawaii from a microgrid by the U.S. Navy SEALs. And there's the news article that says that this microgrid was not being maintained because they lacked access to the infrastructure software, and they couldn't add, they didn't have the password. So people that were living there could not maintain their own infrastructure. So the whole project was millions of dollars lost there because they could not locally maintain it. So just putting it in there.
What I'd like
Thank
to do
you.
now is thank all of you for your questions and participants and everything like that. I'm going to ask you to leave. What I'd like to do is enter into a phase where the committee by itself asks Joanne questions, and we work from there. So thank you for attending. If you can leave, then I'd like to continue with some questions from the committee.
Thank you everyone for coming. I will stop recording now.